The rhythmic splash of milk hitting the tin pail broke the pre-dawn silence, and Bella Jameson's calloused hands worked with practiced efficiency as steam rose from the cow's flank in the September chill of 1884. She had been at this task every morning for 3 years now, ever since her father died and left her nothing but debts, a failing ranch, and the knowledge that no respectable man in Ordway, Colorado wanted a woman who smelled of livestock and had dirt permanently embedded under her fingernails. The barn lantern cast her shadow long against the weathered wood, and she pressed her forehead briefly against the cow's warm side, allowing herself one moment of exhaustion before the sun demanded everything from her again. "That is some impressive work for this hour," a man's voice said from the barn entrance, and Bella nearly knocked over the pail as she jerked upright. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the lightening sky, broad-shouldered and still, his hat pulled low. Bella's heart hammered as she stood, positioning herself behind the cow in case she needed to run. Strangers at dawn meant trouble more often than not. "I did not give you permission to enter my property," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. The man stepped forward into the lantern light, and she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, probably 30 years to her 22, with dark eyes that seemed more curious than threatening. A silver star glinted on his chest, though it was different from the local sheriff's badge. "Name is Jackson Cole, madam. I am a federal marshal passing through, and my horse threw a shoe about a mile back. Saw your light and hoped you might point me toward a blacksmith." He kept his hands visible and away from the gun at his hip, a gesture Bella recognized as deliberate courtesy. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the far end of the barn. "Martin Fisher runs the smithy in town, but he will not be awake for another 2 hours. You can water your horse at the trough if you need." Jackson moved past her with the careful distance of a man who understood a woman alone had reason for caution. He led a limping bay gelding inside, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones that made something in Bella's chest tighten unexpectedly. Her father had spoken to horses that way, back when he was sober enough to speak kindly to anything. She returned to her milking, trying to ignore the marshal's presence as he tended his horse. But she could feel his eyes on her occasionally, assessing without judgment, and it made her self-conscious in a way she had not felt in years. "How many had you running?" he asked after several minutes of silence. 43 cattle, 6 milk cows, 2 horses, and a mule too stubborn to die," Bella replied without looking up. "And before you ask, yes, I manage alone, have been for 3 years. Was not going to question it. I have seen enough of the world to know women can work as hard as any man, sometimes harder." He paused, then added, "Your spread looks well kept from what I saw riding in. That takes considerable skill." The compliment surprised her enough that she glanced up, searching for mockery in his expression and finding none. "Thank you," she said quietly, then felt foolish for the warmth that crept into her cheeks. Jackson settled himself on a hay bale, apparently content to wait for the smithy to open. "You mind if I sit a spell? Been riding since yesterday afternoon." Bella shrugged, finishing with the first cow and moving to the second. The work was meditative, the same motions she had performed thousands of times, and she found herself relaxing slightly as the marshal sat in companionable silence. Most men who came to her ranch either propositioned her with insulting assumptions or treated her like a peculiar specimen to be studied. Jackson Cole did neither. "You eat breakfast yet?" she found herself asking as she finished the second cow. The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "No, madam, but I do not want to impose. I am making food anyway, might as well make enough for 2. She stood, brushing straw from her worn skirt. "Besides, you said you have been riding all night. A man needs food in him. She led him from the barn to the small ranch house, acutely aware of how shabby it must look to a man who traveled extensively. The front porch sagged on one side where the foundation had shifted, and the paint had weathered away years ago. Inside was clean but sparse, with furniture her grandmother had made and curtains Bella had sewn herself from flour sacks. Jackson removed his hat as he entered, his eyes taking in the space with what seemed like approval rather than pity. "You have a good home here." "It keeps the wind out most days," Bella replied, moving to the stove and stirring the coals back to life. She added wood and set about making biscuits, bacon, and eggs with the efficient movements of someone who had learned to cook for ranch hands before she was tall enough to reach the stove without standing on a crate. As she worked, Jackson washed his hands in the basin by the door and then, without being asked, began setting the table. The domesticity of the moment felt strange and intimate. This man she had known for less than an hour moving through her kitchen, as though he belonged there. "Why federal marshal?" she asked, cutting lard into flour. "Most lawmen I know stick to one town." "Got tired of watching the same corruption in the same place," he said simply. "At least this way I can move around, try to do some good where it is needed. Though I will admit, 3 years of this has me wondering if I should not settle somewhere, buy some land, build something that lasts." There was a weariness in his voice that Bella recognized, the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting alone for too long. She slid the biscuits into the oven and turned to face him properly. "What stopped you?" Jackson met her eyes and something passed between them, a recognition of shared understanding. "Never found the right place, I suppose. Or maybe I just kept moving so I would not have to admit I was lonely." The honesty of it stole Bella's breath. She had spent 3 years convincing herself she was fine alone, that she did not need anyone, that independence was worth the price of isolation. Hearing her own hidden truth spoken aloud by a stranger made her realize how heavy the lie had become. "I understand that," she said softly. They ate breakfast as the sun rose fully, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. The food was simple but good, and Jackson ate with the appreciation of a man who had survived on hardtack and jerky for too long. Bella found herself watching him between bites, noting the way his hands moved, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the small scar on his jaw that suggested a past more violent than his gentle demeanor implied. "Tell me about your cattle operation," Jackson said, soaking up egg yolk with a piece of biscuit. "You running beef or dairy?" "Beef mostly, but I keep the milk cows for extra income. Sell butter and cheese in town twice a week." Bella poured them both more coffee. "My father bought this land in '68, thinking he would build an empire. What he built was debt and disappointment, then drank himself into an early grave. I have spent the last 3 years paying off what he owed and trying to keep the bank from taking everything." "You close to clear?" "Another 2 years, maybe 3 if I have bad luck with the herd." She stared into her coffee cup. "Sometimes I wonder if I am fighting for something worthwhile or just too stubborn to admit defeat." Jackson leaned back in his chair, studying her with those dark, thoughtful eyes. "Stubbornness is not always a fault. Sometimes it is the only thing that keeps us alive." After breakfast, Jackson helped her wash the dishes despite her protests, and then they walked back outside into the cool morning. The sun had burned away the last of the mist, revealing the full scope of Bella's ranch. Rolling grassland dotted with cattle, fences that needed mending, a barn that needed a new roof, and the endless work that came with keeping it all functioning. "I should head into town, get that shoe fixed," Jackson said, but he made no move toward his horse. Bella nodded, trying to ignore the strange disappointment settling in her chest. Of course he was leaving. Men like Jackson Cole did not stay in places like this, did not stay with women like her. "Work beside me," Jackson said suddenly, the words tumbling out as though he had surprised himself. "I mean, I could stay a few days, help with some of this work. That fence line looks like it needs attention, and your barn roof has some loose boards that will leak come winter. In exchange for the breakfast and maybe a few more meals, I could make myself useful." Bella stared at him, searching for the ulterior motive, the hidden price. "Why would you do that?" "Because you need the help, and I need a reason to stay in one place for a little while." He met her eyes steadily. "And maybe because I would like to see if this feeling I have is real or just the result of too many lonely nights on the trail." Her heart kicked against her ribs. "What feeling?" "Like I finally found something worth stopping for." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and brave and terrifying. Bella had built walls around herself so thick she had forgotten what it felt like to want to let someone in. But standing here in the morning light with this man who had appeared out of nowhere and offered help without demanding anything in return, she felt those walls begin to crack. "All right," she said quietly. "You can stay." The smile that spread across Jackson's face was worth every risk. They rode into town together, Bella driving her wagon while Jackson led his limping horse alongside. Ordway was small even by frontier standards, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it did not. The townspeople watched their arrival with open curiosity, eyes tracking the federal marshal riding beside Bella Jameson with an interest that would fuel gossip for weeks. At the smithy, Martin Fisher looked up from his forge and wiped soot-stained hands on his leather apron. He was a good man, one of the few in town who had never treated Bella with either pity or contempt. "Miss Jameson, what brings you to town so early?" "Marshal Cole needs a shoe replaced. Threw it on the road north of my place." Martin nodded, already assessing the horse with a professional eye. "I can have him ready in an hour." "That sound acceptable, Marshal?" "More than acceptable, thank you." Jackson helped Bella down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary, a touch that sent heat spiraling through her despite the morning chill. While Martin worked, Bella conducted her usual business, selling butter and cheese to Mrs. Henderson at the general store, and picking up supplies she would need for the coming week. Jackson stayed close but not oppressively so, carrying her purchases and engaging the townspeople with the easy courtesy of a man comfortable in his own skin. "You and the marshal seem friendly," Mrs. Henderson said with poorly concealed interest as she counted out Bella's payment. "He is helping me with some ranch work in exchange for meals," Bella replied evenly, refusing to give the woman more ammunition for gossip. Well, he seems a decent sort, better than some of those ranch hands your father used to hire." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, her voice dropping. "You be careful though, dear. A woman alone with a man, even a lawman, people will talk." "People already talk, Mrs. Henderson. At least now they will have something interesting to discuss." Bella took her money and left before the older woman could respond. Jackson was waiting by the wagon, a small smile playing at his lips. "I take it the town gossip network is already operational. You have no idea. By nightfall, half of Ordway will have us married, and the other half will have me ruined beyond redemption." Bella climbed onto the wagon seat, accepting the hand he offered without hesitation this time. "Does it bother you? What they will say? They have been saying various versions of the same things for 3 years. I stopped letting it bother me around year 2. She gathered the reins, then glanced at him. "Does it bother you? Not even a little bit." They collected his horse from the smithy and headed back toward the ranch, the sun climbing higher and warming the air. The grasslands stretched in every direction, gold and green under the vast Colorado sky, and Bella felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Back at the ranch, Jackson changed into work clothes he carried in his saddlebags and set about examining the fence line while Bella tended to her other chores. She mucked out stalls, fed chickens, and checked on her vegetable garden, but found her attention constantly drawn to the figure working in the distance, his movements efficient and purposeful. By midday, she brought him water and cold biscuits left from breakfast. He had removed his shirt in the growing heat, and Bella found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back, the scars that marked him as a man who had lived through violence and survived. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked, settling on the grass beside where he was replacing a rotten fence post. 6 years. Before that, I was an Army scout, and before that, just a kid trying to survive." He drank deeply from the water jar, then poured some over his head, slicking back his dark hair. "I grew up in Kansas, dirt poor, more siblings than my parents could feed. Left when I was 14, figured I would make my own way. That must have been hard." It was, but it taught me that I was stronger than I thought. He started digging the new post hole, his shoulders flexing with each movement. "What about you? You always want to be a rancher," Bella laughed, the sound bitter even to her own ears. "I wanted to be a teacher. I loved books, loved learning. But my father needed help, and then he died, and suddenly I was responsible for everything. Dreams do not matter much when you are trying to survive." Jackson stopped working and looked at her directly. "They could matter again. If you had help, if the ranch was on solid footing, you could do both. Teach during the school year, run the ranch other times. It does not have to be one or the other." The idea was so foreign, so impossible sounding, that Bella did not know how to respond. She had spent so long in survival mode that she had forgotten to imagine a future beyond just making it through another season. "Maybe," she said quietly, the word feeling like a promise she was not quite ready to make. They worked through the afternoon, falling into an easy rhythm that felt like they had been doing this together for years rather than hours. Jackson was skilled with his hands, the kind of man who could fix almost anything, and Bella found herself grateful not just for the help but for the company, the simple pleasure of another person who understood the satisfaction of hard work well done. As evening approached, they returned to the house, both dusty and tired, but in the good way that comes from productive labor. Bella made dinner while Jackson repaired a broken hinge on the kitchen door, their conversation flowing easily between work and life, and the small observations that build understanding between two people. "So if you could do anything, go anywhere, what would it be?" Jackson asked as they sat down to eat. Bella considered the question seriously, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of cornbread. "I think I would want to see the ocean. I have never seen anything bigger than a river, and the idea of water stretching to the horizon seems impossible. What about you?" "I would want to build a house with my own hands, raise horses, maybe have some kids running around getting into trouble." He paused, a slight color rising in his cheeks. "And I would want to wake up every morning next to someone who chose to be there, not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be." The air between them charged with something electric and terrifying and wonderful. Bella set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. "Jackson, you have known me for 1 day. I know. And maybe I am crazy, maybe this is the loneliness talking, but I have met a lot of people in my travels and I have never felt this before. Like I was supposed to end up here, supposed to meet you." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, not quite touching. "I am not asking you to feel the same way. I am just asking if you would be willing to see where this goes." Bella looked at his hand, at the calluses and scars that matched her own, at the offering of connection after so much isolation. Every practical bone in her body screamed that this was foolish, that she barely knew this man, that she could not afford to trust, could not risk being hurt or abandoned, or any of the 1,000 ways people found to disappoint each other. But there was another voice, quieter but insistent, that whispered about the warmth in her chest when he smiled, about the rightness of working beside him, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good. She placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin, the gentle squeeze of his fingers around hers. "I would like that," she said. The smile that broke across Jackson's face could have lit the entire prairie. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, the kind that speaks of intimacy rather than awkwardness, and then sat on the porch as stars emerged overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them, cattle lowing, horses shifting in their stalls, the distant cry of a coyote. "You ever think about how big the world is?" Bella asked, leaning back against the porch post. "How many people are out there, how many lives we will never know about?" "All the time. Makes you feel small but also part of something larger." Jackson sat on the steps below her, close enough that she could rest her hand on his shoulder if she wanted. "I used to find it lonely, that bigness. But right now, sitting here with you, it just makes me grateful that out of all those lives and all those places, I ended up here." Bella did reach out then, her fingers brushing the back of his neck, feeling him lean into the touch like a man starved for gentle contact. They stayed like that for a long time, connected by that simple point of contact, until exhaustion and early mornings demanded they seek their beds. "You can sleep in the spare room," Bella said, showing him the small space off the kitchen that she used mostly for storage. "It is not much, but the bed is decent. It is perfect. Thank you, Bella." He said her name like it meant something, like it was important, and she felt that dangerous warmth spreading through her chest again. She left him to settle in and lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of someone else in her house. It should have felt intrusive, this disruption of her solitude, but instead it felt right, like a missing piece sliding into place. Sleep came slowly, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears, and the terrifying hope that maybe her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. The next morning, Bella woke before dawn as always, years of habit impossible to break. She dressed quietly and made her way to the barn, expecting to be alone with her thoughts and her cows. Instead, she found Jackson already there, sleeves rolled up, settling himself beside the first cow with an ease that suggested familiarity. "What are you doing?" she asked, not quite able to keep the smile from her voice. He looked up, his face illuminated by the lantern light, and the expression on his face stole her breath. It was tender and determined and full of promise. "I am working beside you," he said simply, "and every morning is ours." The words wrapped around Bella's heart and squeezed, beautiful and overwhelming. She moved to the cow beside his, their shoulders nearly touching, and began her familiar work. But this time, she was not alone. This time, the rhythmic splash of milk was a duet instead of a solo, a shared rhythm that felt like the beginning of something profound. "You know how to milk a cow," she observed, trying to keep her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Grew up on a farm, remember? Before I left home, I probably milked more cows than I can count." He worked with practiced efficiency, his movements confident. "This feels good, being useful in this way again. I forgot how satisfying simple work can be." They finished the milking as the sun began to paint the eastern horizon, and Bella felt something settling in her soul, a peace she had not experienced in longer than she could remember. They carried the milk to the house together, their hands brushing as they worked, each casual touch building a foundation of intimacy and trust. Over breakfast, Jackson laid out a plan for the day's work. "I noticed your water pump is not working properly. I can fix that this morning. And that loose board on the barn roof, we should get that secured before weather moves in. Winter will be here before you know it, and you need your structure sound." "We," Bella repeated softly. "You keep saying we." Jackson met her eyes across the table. "Is that all right?" "Yes." "It is more than all right." The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt both natural and miraculous. Every morning, they milked the cows together in the pre-dawn darkness, their conversation quiet and intimate in the way that only that hour allows. They worked the ranch side by side, Jackson's skill and strength complementing Bella's knowledge and determination. In the evenings, they shared meals and talked about everything and nothing, building understanding through the accumulation of small revelations and shared laughter. On the fourth day, a telegram arrived in town requesting Jackson's assistance with a prisoner transport. He read it in Bella's kitchen, his face troubled. "I need to go," he said quietly. "This is part of my job, and I gave my word I would be available." Bella felt her heart sink, even though she had known this moment would come. "How long will you be gone?" "A week, maybe 2 depending on complications." He crossed to where she stood by the stove, taking her hands in his. "But I will come back, Bella, I promise you that. This place, this is what I want. People break promises all the time. I am not other people." His hands tightened on hers, his eyes intense. "I have never said anything I did not mean. When I tell you I will come back, you can believe it." She wanted to believe him, desperately, but fear was a powerful thing. What if you do not? What if you decide this was just a pleasant diversion, that you prefer your freedom to being tied to one place, one person? Jackson released one of her hands to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Bella, I have been free for 16 years, and all it got me was lonely. What we are building here, this is not a cage. This is home." Then he kissed her, soft and sure, a promise made with lips and breath and the tender press of his mouth against hers. Bella melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for those few moments, nothing existed except the two of them and this perfect, terrifying connection. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "Wait for me." "I will," she whispered, and meant it. He left that afternoon, after checking and rechecking everything on the ranch, making sure Bella would be safe and cared for in his absence. She stood in the yard and watched him ride away, his form growing smaller against the vast landscape, and fought the voice that whispered he would never return. The days without Jackson were harder than Bella wanted to admit. She had grown accustomed to his presence so quickly that his absence felt like a physical ache. The morning milking was lonely again, the work more difficult without his help, the evenings quiet in ways that felt empty rather than peaceful. On the 8th day, a storm rolled in from the north, bringing rain and wind that battered the ranch. Bella spent a frantic afternoon securing loose items and bringing the animals into shelter, getting soaked to the bone in the process. That night, huddled in her house listening to the storm rage, she allowed herself to cry for the first time in years. The tears a release of 3 years of exhaustion and loneliness, and the terrifying vulnerability of having opened her heart. The storm lasted 2 days, and when it finally cleared, Bella emerged to survey the damage. A section of fence was down, several roof shingles had blown away, and her vegetable garden was a muddy disaster. She stood in her yard, looking at the work that needed doing, and felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. Then she heard hoofbeats, and her heart stopped. Jackson appeared over the rise, riding hard, his horse lathered with effort. He pulled up in her yard, dismounting before the animal had fully stopped, and covered the distance between them in 4 long strides. "Are you all right?" "The storm. I was halfway to Denver when it hit, and all I could think about was you here alone." His hands moved over her, checking for injury, his face tight with worry. "I am fine. Some damage to the ranch, but nothing I cannot fix." Bella stared at him, water still dripping from the eaves around them. "You came back." "Of course I came back. I told you I would." He pulled her close, and she felt the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. "Did you doubt me? Everyone leaves eventually. Then I will just have to prove I am not everyone." He pulled back enough to look down at her, his hands framing her face. "I love you, Bella. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 weeks, but I am 32 years old and I know what I feel. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, here on this ranch if you will have me." The words unlocked something inside her, a flood of emotion so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "I think I have loved you since you offered to work beside me that first morning." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and tender all at once, and Bella kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "Now we fix the fence and the roof together, and then we figure out the rest as we go." Jackson took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "But first, you are going to catch a chill standing out here in wet clothes. Let us get you inside and dry." They spent the rest of the day assessing damage and beginning repairs, working with the easy coordination they had developed. As evening approached, Jackson made dinner while Bella changed into dry clothes, a domestic reversal that made her smile. Over the meal, they talked about the future with a seriousness that came from commitment rather than fantasy. Jackson explained he could resign his marshal position, that he had saved enough money to invest in the ranch and help clear the remaining debt. Bella shared her dream of eventually teaching, of building something that would outlast them both. "We could get married," Jackson said, the words casual but his eyes intense. "Not right away if you are not ready, but eventually. I want to do this right, Bella. I want to court you properly, let the town see that I am serious, that this is not some temporary arrangement." "The town will talk no matter what we do. Let them talk. I only care what you think." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "What do you say? Will you let me court you properly?" Bella thought about propriety and reputation, and all the things her mother had tried to teach her before she died. Then she thought about waking up beside Jackson every morning, about building something real and lasting with a man who saw her as an equal, who loved her not despite her rough edges but because of them. "Yes," she said. "Court me, marry me, build a life with me. Yes to all of it." The joy on his face was worth every risk, every moment of fear, every year of loneliness that had led her to this moment. The next 2 months passed in a blur of hard work and growing intimacy. Jackson resigned his position as marshal, settling into ranch life with an enthusiasm that never wavered even when the work was exhausting or frustrating. He was good with the cattle, better with the horses, and exceptional at the 1,000 small repairs that kept a ranch functioning. Bella found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing her fears and dreams and the small vulnerabilities she had kept hidden. Jackson listened without judgment, offering support without trying to fix things she did not need fixing, understanding the difference between help and control. They courted properly, at least by frontier standards. Jackson accompanied her to town every week, escorted her to church on Sundays, and made his intentions clear to anyone who asked, and several people who did not. The town gossips were disappointed by the lack of scandal, though Mrs. Henderson did manage to spread a rumor that they had secretly married, which Bella found more amusing than insulting. In late November, as the first serious snow began to fall, Jackson proposed officially. He did it in the barn during the morning milking, which was so perfectly them that Bella started laughing even as tears streamed down her face. "Is that a yes?" he asked, grinning as he held out a simple gold band. "Yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I will marry you." They married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Ordway Church, with Martin Fisher as Jackson's witness and Mrs. Henderson as Bella's, the irony of which was not lost on either of them. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Bella felt something settle in her soul, a rightness that transcended any doubt. The wedding night was tender and sweet, and everything Bella had hoped for, Jackson's gentleness and passion creating an intimacy that left them both breathless and amazed. They lay tangled together afterward, the winter wind howling outside while they remained warm and safe in each other's arms. "I never thought I would have this," Bella whispered against his chest. "I had convinced myself I did not need it, that I was fine alone." "You were fine alone because you are strong and capable," Jackson replied, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "But being strong does not mean you have to carry everything yourself. That is what partnership is, sharing the weight so neither person has to bear it alone. When did you get so wise?" "The moment I saw you in that barn, working so hard while everyone slept. I knew then I had found something extraordinary." The first year of their marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Together, they cleared the remaining debt on the ranch, a moment they celebrated with tears and champagne that Jackson had saved for the occasion. They bought additional cattle, improved the breeding stock, and increased their butter and cheese production until Bella's products were sought after throughout the county. In the spring, the town posted a notice seeking a schoolteacher. Jackson saw it first and brought it home, placing it on the kitchen table where Bella would find it. "You should apply," he said that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "The ranch needs me. The ranch needs us both, and we can manage. Bella, you have dreamed of teaching since you were a girl. We are stable now. We can afford to have you spend part of your time doing something you love." She looked at him, this man who had appeared in her barn that morning and changed everything. "You would not resent it?" "Me being gone during school hours. Why would I resent you pursuing your passion? Your happiness is my happiness. Besides, I will enjoy having a teacher for a wife. Maybe you can teach me proper grammar so I stop sounding like an uneducated marshal." Bella applied for the position and was hired immediately, the school board thrilled to have someone with her intelligence and work ethic. She began teaching that fall, working with a dozen students of varying ages in the one-room schoolhouse. Jackson was right. They managed the ranch together, their efficiency and partnership making up for the hours she spent teaching. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and exciting. They worked the ranch early mornings and evenings. Bella taught during the day, and they spent their nights planning and dreaming and building something that felt permanent and real. 2 years after their marriage, Bella realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror, the fear of losing herself to motherhood warring with the desire to create a family with the man she loved. "What if I cannot do it all?" she asked Jackson one night as they lay in bed, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach. "The ranch, teaching, being a mother, what if something has to give?" "Then we figure it out together," he said simply, his hand covering hers. "We have always adapted, always found solutions. A baby will not change that. We are a team, Bella. Whatever comes, we face it together." Their son was born in early March of 1887, arriving during a late winter storm with the kind of dramatic timing that made Bella laugh even through the pain. They named him James Clayton Cole, honoring Jackson's father and grandfather while giving him his own identity. Motherhood was harder and more wonderful than Bella had anticipated. Jackson was an involved father from the start, changing diapers and walking the floor with a fussy baby without complaint. They took turns with night feedings, shared the exhaustion and the joy, and marveled together at each tiny milestone. Bella took the rest of the school year off but returned to teaching the following fall, bringing baby James with her when he was small. The students adored him, and it taught them lessons about care and responsibility that no textbook could provide. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. They expanded their land holdings, adding another 200 acres when a neighboring rancher decided to retire and move back east. They built a larger house, one with enough room for their growing family and the future they were creating. 2 years after James came a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, named for both their mothers. She had Bella's dark hair and Jackson's dark eyes, and a will that suggested she would never let anyone tell her what she could or could not do. Jackson was a wonderful father, patient and playful and firm when necessary. He taught James to ride and rope, to read the weather and respect the animals. He braided Elizabeth's hair and let her follow him around the ranch asking endless questions, answering each one with the seriousness it deserved. Bella balanced teaching and motherhood with the same determination she had brought to saving the ranch. Some days were harder than others. Some moments made her question if she was doing anything well. But Jackson was always there, supporting without taking over, encouraging without pressuring, loving her through the doubts and the triumphs. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood together in the pasture at dawn, watching their cattle graze while their children slept safely in the house. The sun painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink, the same colors it had been that first morning when Jackson found her milking cows. "Do you ever regret it?" Bella asked, leaning into his side. "Giving up the marshal life, settling here?" Jackson wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Not for a single second. This, right here, this is everything I ever wanted and more than I thought I could have. You gave me a home, Bella. You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me the same thing. I was so focused on just getting through each day that I forgot to hope for anything better. Then you walked into my barn and offered to work beside me, and suddenly everything changed." "Every morning is ours," Jackson said softly, repeating the words he had spoken that first morning, the promise he had kept every day since. "Every morning," Bella agreed, turning in his arms to kiss him as the sun rose on another day, another morning that belonged to them both. The children grew, as children do, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James proved to have his father's patience and his mother's stubbornness, a combination that served him well in ranch work. Elizabeth inherited her mother's love of learning and her father's sense of justice, already declaring at age 5 that she would be a judge when she grew up, so she could make sure everyone was treated fairly. Jackson and Bella taught them about hard work and integrity, about treating people with respect regardless of their circumstances, about standing up for what was right even when it was difficult. They taught them about love through example, showing them that partnership meant supporting each other, communicating honestly, and choosing each other every day even when it was not easy. The ranch continued to prosper under their combined management. Jackson's contacts from his marshal days proved useful in establishing fair cattle prices and avoiding the fraud that plagued many ranchers. Bella's teaching income and her dairy products provided steady additional income that allowed them to weather difficult seasons without going into debt. They became pillars of the Ordway community, respected for their hard work and integrity. Jackson served on the town council, helping to make decisions about schools and roads and law enforcement. Bella continued teaching, shaping young minds and proving that a woman could be a wife, mother, businesswoman, and educator all at once. But despite their public successes, their greatest joy remained in the private moments. Morning coffee on the porch, quiet conversations after the children were asleep, the easy intimacy of people who had chosen each other and continued choosing each other through all the small and large challenges of life. When James was 10 and Elizabeth was 8, Bella became pregnant again, a surprise that thrilled and terrified them both. They were older now, more settled, and the thought of starting over with a baby felt daunting. "We are not young anymore," Bella said, her hand on her still flat stomach. "I am 37, Jackson. What if something goes wrong? Then we will handle it together like we handle everything." He pulled her close, his hand covering hers. "We have 2 healthy children and years of experience now. We know what we are doing." "Do we ever really know what we are doing?" "No, but we figure it out anyway. That is the beauty of it." Their second daughter, Sarah Jane, was born in the spring of 1892, arriving without complication despite Bella's fears. She was a calm baby, content to observe the chaos of ranch life with solemn blue eyes that seemed older than her infant face. James and Elizabeth were wonderful older siblings, doting on their baby sister with a protectiveness that made both Jackson and Bella laugh. The house was full and noisy and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also full of love and laughter, and the kind of messy joy that comes from a life well lived. As the years continued to pass, Bella sometimes thought back to that morning when Jackson had walked into her barn, a stranger who would become her everything. She thought about how close she had come to sending him away, how easily fear could have made her miss out on all of this. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. He was graying at the temples now, his face more lined, but his eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had captured her heart. "About how grateful I am that you threw that horseshoe," Bella replied, reaching for his hand. "About how one random morning changed everything. It was not random. I believe we were meant to find each other. The universe has a funny way of putting people where they need to be when they need to be there." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, I would have to accept that pure chance brought me the greatest gift of my life, and that feels too uncertain. I prefer to think that somehow we were always supposed to end up together." Bella smiled, lacing her fingers through his. "I like that version better too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land they had built together, listening to their children's laughter mixing with the evening sounds of the ranch. James was teaching Elizabeth to throw a rope, while baby Sarah sat in the grass pulling up dandelions with the serious concentration of the very young. "Every morning is ours," Jackson said softly, the words a touchstone and a promise. "Every morning," Bella agreed, resting her head on his shoulder as the sky turned to shades of purple and gold. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both large and small. James grew into a man who combined his parents' best qualities, eventually taking over much of the ranch management as Jackson and Bella aged. He married a teacher from the next county over, a smart, kind woman named Rebecca who fit into their family as though she had always belonged. Elizabeth pursued her dream of law, a nearly impossible goal for a woman in the 1890s. But with her parents' support and her own formidable determination, she found a way, studying with a sympathetic judge and eventually passing the bar exam. She became known throughout Colorado for her fierce advocacy and unshakable principles, her parents' daughter in every way that mattered. Sarah, the surprise baby who had come along when her parents thought they were done having children, proved to have her mother's gift for teaching and her father's gentle strength. She took over Bella's position at the schoolhouse when Bella finally retired at 55, continuing the legacy of education and care. Jackson and Bella grew old together, their bodies slowing but their partnership as strong as ever. They still rose before dawn most mornings, drawn by habit and preference to greet the day together. They no longer milked cows themselves, but they sat in the barn and watched their grandchildren do it, passing on skills and stories to another generation. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought together the entire town. People stood up one by one to talk about how Jackson and Bella had impacted their lives, the help they had given, the example they had set, the difference they had made. "I am not comfortable with all this attention," Bella whispered to Jackson as yet another person stood to speak. "Then focus on me," he replied, taking her hand. "Forget everyone else. Just remember that everything they are saying is true. We built something good here, Bella. We built a life that mattered. We did it together. Together. That was always the secret." As they entered their 60s, Jackson's health began to decline, the accumulated years of hard work and old injuries taking their toll. He developed a persistent cough that worried Bella, though he insisted he was fine. She bullied him into seeing a doctor, who prescribed rest and gave warnings they both knew Jackson would not heed. "I am not going to spend my last years sitting idle," he told Bella when she tried to get him to take it easy. "I would rather live a shorter life doing what I love than a longer one being miserable." "I would rather have you longer," she replied, her voice catching. "And I would rather have every moment with you be quality, not quantity." He pulled her close, ignoring the protest of his aging body. "We have had a good run, Bella. Better than good. Extraordinary. When my time comes, I do not want you grieving what we lost. I want you celebrating what we had." "Do not talk like that. We have to talk like that. We are not young anymore. But I promise you this. I will stay as long as I can, fight as hard as I can, because leaving you is the last thing I want to do." He kept that promise for another 5 years, stubbornly clinging to life and vitality, even as his body betrayed him. They made the most of those years, spending long evenings on their porch, taking slow walks around the ranch, playing with their grandchildren, and simply being together in the way that only people who have loved each other for decades can do. Jackson died on a spring morning in 1917, surrounded by his family, his hand clasped in Bella's. His last words were, "Every morning was ours," and Bella held him as he took his final breath, her tears soaking into his shirt as she memorized the feel of him one last time. The grief nearly broke her. After 32 years of partnership, the loss felt impossible to bear. But their children rallied around her, and the ranch they had built together continued to function, a living legacy of their love and work. Bella continued to rise before dawn each morning, drawn by habit to the barn, even though there was no reason for her to be there. She sat in the same spot where Jackson had first said he would work beside her, and she talked to him in the quiet darkness, finding comfort in the familiar space and the memories it held. "I miss you," she whispered into the silence one morning, 6 months after his death. "I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe sometimes. But I am still here, still standing because you taught me how. You taught me that I am stronger than I think, that I can do hard things, that love does not end just because someone is gone." She felt no mystical presence, heard no voice answering back. But she felt peace settling over her like a blanket, the knowledge that she had been loved completely and had loved the same way in return. Bella lived another 12 years after Jackson's death. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with teaching and reading and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She never remarried, never even considered it. Jackson had been her great love, her partner, her everything, and she had no desire to replace something irreplaceable. On her final morning at the age of 79, Bella woke before dawn as always. She dressed slowly, her body protesting in ways it never used to, and made her way to the barn one last time. The ranch had changed over the years, grown and modernized, but the barn remained much as it had been that morning in 1884 when a stranger walked in and changed her life. She sat in her usual spot, closing her eyes and letting the memories wash over her. Jackson's voice saying he would work beside her, the warmth of his hand in hers, the sight of him walking toward her across the pasture, the feel of his arms around her. Every morning they had shared, every sunrise they had greeted together, every moment of partnership and love. Every morning was ours, she whispered into the darkness, and she swore she felt an answering presence, as though Jackson had been waiting all these years to hear those words again. They found her there when the sun rose, a peaceful smile on her face, her eyes closed as though she had simply fallen asleep. In her hand, she clutched the worn gold band Jackson had given her over half a century before, the metal smooth from years of wear. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Bella and Jackson had touched. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren spoke of their legacy, not just in land and buildings and herds of cattle, but in the example they had set, the love they had shared, the truth they had proven that partnership and respect and choosing each other every day could create something extraordinary. They buried Bella beside Jackson on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, and below that, the words that had defined their life together. Jackson and Bella Cole, he found her before dawn. They worked beside each other, and every morning was theirs years later. Their great-great-grandchildren would still work that ranch, still rise before dawn to tend the cattle, still feel the presence of something enduring in the land and the buildings and the legacy of two people who had loved each other completely. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down through generations as an example of how one random morning, one act of courage, one decision to say yes could change everything. And on quiet mornings just before sunrise, when the light was soft and the world was still, workers in that barn would sometimes swear they could hear voices, a man and a woman talking in low, intimate tones, sharing the last moments of darkness before the day demanded everything from them. Every morning, forever theirs.